Steve Peterson received 2 bachelor's degrees from Utah State, one in administrative systems in 1979 and one in speech in 1984. He and his wife Shannon are currently living in Salt Lake City. Over the past 20 years, Steve has successfully developed residential and commercial properties within the Salt Lake Valley. In January 2002, Steve and Nathan Riggs founded Millrock. Millrock Development is a private entrepreneurial real estate investment and development company with investments currently in Utah, with future expansion throughout the western United States. Millrock is currently managing investments and developments valued in excess of $130 million. Currently, Steve is obtaining entitlements and master planning a 900-unit townhouse community located on 125 acres in Eagle Mountain. A little background on Millrock. Millrock Park is a recently completed project consisting of 500 square feet of Class A office space. Is considered the best of class and landmark of distinction within its marketplace. When one thinks of Millrock, of the Millrock name, you associate it with success and value. So please join with me in welcoming Steve Peterson.
Thank you. Well, as mentioned, my name's Steve Peterson, and I'm currently the general partner of Millrock Development. You can't believe everything you read on the website. Some of that information about the residential development, we worked on that a few years back, and that's been completed. But our focus at Millrock currently is to develop Class A office space, and we have a project that is about 500,000 square feet in the city of Holiday that we just completed. As I drove up here, it reminded me of these winters that you have up here. When I was a student, a freshman here, I made the mistake of taking a class at 6:30 in the morning. It was a pre-ski conditioning class in the middle of winter, and we'd go down to the field house and we'd run up and down the stairs to get ready for the ski season. And that was the last time I made that mistake. Usually in the winter months I wanted to start my classes around 10 when it warmed up a little bit. Those wind chill factors were pretty cold. I also recall going down by the Willard Bay hunting, and I'd go down duck hunting, and I went down there with my 12-gauge shotgun and saw a bunch of ducks flying across Willard Bay, and I shot one. It went down. My dog went out and walked across the water and grabbed it, brought it back to me, and I was pretty amazed. So the next day I brought my friend Brett down there, and I said, "Brett, let's go hunting." So we went out and shot a couple ducks, and my dog walked across the water, grabbed the ducks, brought them back, and I looked over to my friend Brett and I said, you notice anything strange about my dog? And he goes, "Yeah, your dog doesn't know how to swim." But today I'd like to set out the agenda so there's a clear understanding of what we're going to talk about today. And I wanted to share with you a few experiences that I've had in business, and hopefully you can take those experiences, and if I can just touch one of you in a certain way that would change the direction of your life or improve your life, then my time will be well spent today to be here. I'd like to talk a little bit about school experiences versus education. I think there's a combination of that happens up here at the university. Goal setting, work experiences and odd jobs to get through school and work towards your career, and then career and lessons I've learned there, and then talk a little bit about Millrock Park, what we've done, and what our future goals are to Millrock Park, and then open it up to questions after that. I'd like to play a little presentation here. See if we can get some sound to it.
Craft and big contracts. But we're going to call it audible. We're going to switch sports tonight because we've run across an absolutely amazing basketball player that we want you to see. Here's Steve Hartman.
Greece Athena High School in Rochester, New York has a new most unlikely hero, a special ed student by the name of Jason McElwain.
Just keep it going.
Jason is the basketball team manager. For the past couple years, he's been assisting Coach Jim Johnson, helping with whatever the team needs.
And go! Get him motivated, hand out water, and just be enthusiastic.
Enthusiastic, to say the least. Despite being born with autism, Jason's father says his son has never had a problem expressing himself at basketball games.
You know, I was always concerned that he might get a technical when they lose a game because he, start yelling or whatever.
Let's have a hard practice tomorrow. All hour and a half, and let's get ready for Arcadia. Let's go. 1, 2, 3, 10.
Because he has been so devoted to the team, for the last game of the season, Coach Johnson decided to let Jason actually suit up. Not to play necessarily, just to let him feel what it's like to wear a jersey. At least that was the plan. But with 4 minutes to go in last week's game, Coach Johnson stood up and pointed to number 52, Jason McElwain. After years of fetching water and toweling off other people's sweat, Jason was actually in a game. His first shot was a 20-footer from the right baseline.
Was it close? Did you almost
I
make it?
just airballed it.
I'm like, just, dear God, please, let's just get him a basket.
His second shot missed too, but the third was a charm. A three-point no-doubter. And Jason wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot.
If I wasn't there to witness it, I wouldn't have believed it,
You caught fire. I just caught fire. That was hot as a pistol.
Jason ended up shooting 6 3-pointers. One right after the other. He had 20 points total, and each time a shot went in, his teammates and the crowd went a little crazier. His picks right at the buzzer created total mayhem. Because he is autistic, Jason says he's used to feeling different, but never this different. Never this wonderful. Steve Hartman, CBS News, Rochester, New York.
I ran across that clip and it really impacted me on different levels, from an individual that had limited capabilities but went out and chased his dreams, to someone that did something that someone told him that he couldn't do. And in life there are many experiences that you're going to have as you go out into the business world, and you're going to find that you fall down and pick yourself back up. You're not going to bat 100%. Babe Ruth is known for one of the greatest all-time hitters in the game, sport of baseball, but seldom do you hear that he was also one of the individuals that struck out the most. And so the key is having focus of knowing where you're going to go and what you want to do. So I'd like to spend a few minutes on a couple of the experiences I had while I was up here. I was involved in a fraternity. I also was a vice president of the student body, ran for election one year. I came from a very humble background in terms of economics. My father was an architect, but we had little means, and so I had to work to get through school, pay the tuition, and so I worked on scholarships, probably similar to many of you here and sitting here today. And so I had to find jobs to do, and I also got involved. So the student body vice president gave me a scholarship to pay for the books and the tuition. And I got also involved in an organization called UIA, it's Utah Intercollegiate Assembly. And so what we do there is all the universities throughout the state would get together and we'd simulate the state government at the state legislature. So we'd go to the Capitol and we'd have a senator and 2 representatives from each one of the universities. And we'd go up there and we'd simulate the same process that the elected officials do. And then we'd pass legislation that was important to students. And then we'd lobby that legislation to the legislature the following year, or that following session. And what I found is that oftentimes it's important to do the studies, but it's just important to get involved and interact and create relationships and friendships, because that networking will carry you throughout your entire life. And I'll show some examples as we go on how a lot of the opportunities I had were a result of the individuals that I knew along the way, and or family members knew, and networking becomes such a key component to business. So in goal setting, we need to know, you guys have probably heard a few discussions on goal setting throughout your college career here. But in order to reach a goal, we've got to know what that goal is, and we need to be able to write it down. And I remember I was a junior in high school, and I had been on a serious motorcycle accident, and I busted my leg, and I cut it up pretty bad, and I ended up in the hospital, and I had a cast from my toe to my hip. And I went home and I had about 2 weeks in bed that I couldn't move because it was a pretty serious fracture. And it gave me plenty of time to reflect on what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. And I sat down and I wrote down some goals. And I broke them down into different categories. And I was 17 at the time, and I had goals that went all the way up to the age of 47. So I broke them down in age groups, and I also broke them down into categories. So I had some spiritual goals that were important to me. I had some goals in terms of my education, and I also had some goals in terms of business. And I just want to read just a few of those goals to you. You know, obviously I wanted to graduate from high school, and I wanted a college degree, and at the time I thought I was going to be a lawyer, and I wanted to go to law school. And also I wanted to understand computers. I wanted to learn how to program them. Back when I went to school, it was card readers. You know, you have more capability in a BlackBerry today than you do in the ATs or the IBM XTs that we had as the computers. And so back then I wanted to have a mainframe, and I wanted to have a business. I wanted to be involved in real estate development. I took 40 hours here at Utah State specializing in real estate development, and I also took another 20 hours in marketing. And that was a passion that I had, that I always had a desire to be involved in that. Even when I was at a young age, I wrote these goals down saying that I wanted to be involved in leasing, selling, and developing raw land, and I wanted to build a city. You know, some of these goals are pretty larger than life. Some are pretty simple. And that's the nice thing about goals. When we program those goals, they can be anything, but if we never program, they'll never occur. So you should jump for, I mean, you know, whatever that passion is you have in life, you should establish that goal and establish a high one that's difficult to obtain. I also had interest in low-cost housing. I wanted to perpetuate that worldwide. I wanted to also be involved in politics, and on a local level and national level. And I wanted to befriend big business in Utah and the nation, and own my own computer. Back then I wanted to be a millionaire, and I wanted to be the president of the company that I owned. And then in the year 2000 I updated those goals, because those goals were written when I was pretty young. So about 8 years ago, my wife and I were sitting on a couch, and I sat down and I broke these goals down into spiritual, temporal, intellectual, physical, family, and traveling. And I'll just briefly highlight one or two items in each of these. But in spiritual, I wanted to be honest in my dealings. And in temporal, I wanted to be financially independent. And I wanted to study the great civilizations, leaders, laws, and architecture of the world. And physically, I wanted to work out 3 times a week, and I wanted to get 8 hours of sleep. Simple. Some of these are real simple goals, but they're important, again, to program in. On my family, that really is the source of my happiness in life, I wanted to spend more time with them, and I wanted to teach by example the importance of the value of hard work. I wanted my kids to know how to work hard in this world, because a lot of what I've noticed in successful people is a result of hard work and determination and persistence. I've met a lot of brilliant people and a lot of well-educated people, and if you have that and you have that persistence and hard work combined, it's a lethal formula for success. Then we wanted to travel. I wanted to travel and I want to golf the top 100 golf courses in the world. And I think we've hit maybe 5 of them so far. So we have a lot of fun ahead of us. But this year, and we have about 20 countries we want to travel. This year we're going to fly into Paris and we're going to go over and see the Vatican in Italy. And then we're going to jump on a ship and go over to Turkey. And then we're going to go to the islands of Greece and then come back to Paris and spend a few days there. And we're going to take our kids there with us and enjoy that. And that's just one more thing I can check off on those goals that I've established. So goals are very important, and the lesson I learned there is that there's a reason why businesses have mission statements, value statements, and that an organization needs to know what the vision is of the leaders of that organization. They need to know what the values by which you value and that you're going to run that organization by, how you value the employees, how you value your customers, and that just doesn't happen. In our business, we say we have the Nordstrom philosophy. If you come to our park and bring your business to our park, then we want to take care of you. Unless it's a material thing that costs a lot of money, the customer, our client, our tenant is always right, regardless if he's wrong. So our entire staff knows that. The tenant is always right. And if it's material in nature, then the staff will come to myself or one of my managers and discuss it and figure out how to make it right to the tenant. And every organization has its own culture and its own philosophy, its own values. But as you go out there, if you're going to work for yourself or you're going to work for someone else, I would say it's very important to know that, because it's going to tell you what kind of environment you're going to be working in. And if you're fortunate enough to be the leader in that organization, you need to, and establish what you value and what your vision is. You need to establish those goals up front. And I've also found in goal setting that you need to have you really want to follow where your passions are, and it's a lot easier to work and enjoy going to work every day if it's something you really enjoy to do. And I would suggest that when you look at establishing your goals, that you take a self-inventory and think of where your strengths are. Everybody has their own little strengths, just like Jason here with the basketball team. His strength, I'm sure he day in, day out wanted to be in those games. And he really looked at it and he practiced and he studied and he was determined. He actually had some talent there that very few realized at the time. And if you study where your talents are and your strengths are and then capitalize on that and be the best at what you can be, you'll be much more successful because you'll enjoy what you're doing. Work experience and odd jobs. It really is true that talent or formal education or luck or intellectual brilliance never can compare to persistent self-discipline and determination. If you have that, you're more competitive. But if you have that and you don't have the other, it's really difficult to be successful. The most important ingredient is every time you stumble or fall down, you pick yourself back up, realize where you want to be, what you want to be, and continue to and be determined to succeed. I want to share a few examples in my work experience that were similar to that. I read in the Wall Street Journal yesterday, it was they had Logan here. I'm sure it was in the news the other day too, but why college towns are looking smart, and it goes there and it says that a couple of universities, including Utah State, have one of the lowest employment rate in the country, and that college towns are a great place to work. When I was here, it was pretty difficult to get a job, and so I was trying to figure out, well, how can I make some quick money? That was my goal, just want to make some quick money. So I thought about it, and I went down to Fred Meyer's, which I think is a Smith's now, and went in there and asked if I could lease their area where they have the gardening, all the garden supplies in the summertime. Struck a lease with them, went down to my banker, who I only knew because he was my local bishop in a ward here. Never had done any business with him. I said, I want to borrow $10,000 from you. He goes, well, what do you have for collateral? And I said, I have my signature, I have my reputation, I have my name. That's about it. And he looked at me, he says, well, Steve, that's good enough for me. I'll lend you that $10,000. I don't know if these were some days of past. What was the name of the bank? It was Walker Bank at the time. It's Zions now. And I still bank with those guys today, so just not the same banker. So anyway, Paul said, Steve, yeah, I'll lend it to you. I told him what I was going to do, obviously. So I went up to Montana, and I bought a bunch of Christmas trees, and I brought them down to Fred Meyer's, and I put them in there, and 3 days later, I had $20,000 profit in my pocket. I thought, wow, this is easy money. Why have I not done this before? So the next year, I had a friend, he was a former missionary companion that lived up in Idaho, Blackfoot, Idaho. And we had talked, and he heard about what I had done the year before, and he said, Steve, let's expand that. Let's go into multiple locations. Let's take it through 10 different locations in southern Idaho and northern Utah. I said, well, that sounds good. And he says, but I have no way to fund it. And I said, well, let me call my friend Paul at the bank. And I said, Paul, last year I borrowed $10,000, but this year I need to borrow $100,000 from you. And he goes, well, why? And I said, well, we're going to expand the business. We're going to go into 10 locations instead of 1. Somehow I convinced him to do it. To this day, I don't know why he did. So, and I wish he would not have, actually, when you hear the rest of the story. But so we went out and we filled up all these lots and leased all these places and sold the Christmas trees. And 15 days later, most of the trees in northern Utah were selling, but the trees up in Idaho were not. And so I drove up there and I couldn't figure out why. I mean, it's not that much different in the market. And I went up there and it was a cold winter. And I found out that all of our workers were sitting inside their trailers trying to keep warm, weren't going out there talking to the customers to sell them the trees. And here we have this perishable item that perishes, would be perishable within 2 weeks and was worthless. And it didn't get any better from that. So at the end of the day, we tallied everything up, and instead of making $20,000, I lost $20,000 that year. And so I went to Paul. I said, Paul, I'm $20,000 shy of what I need, but I'm good for the money, and I'll pay it back. And he put me on a payment program, and I paid it back. And as an entrepreneur, one of the most important things you can ever do is have flawless credit. I can't emphasize to you enough how important your credit is. Always live within your means, and always pay back what you've borrowed. And next time you need money, you can go there and they'll provide it to you. So after that, I had to figure out a way to quickly make some money. So I found American International Insurance. They were here in town, and they're AIG now. You guys have probably heard of them in the news a little bit. And they said, well, we've got this, we'll sign you up and you can sell insurance. So I went out and I sold insurance to my friends, and I sold insurance to my family, and the pipeline dried up. And it was very difficult, and I realized I had absolutely no passion for that industry or that business. It just wasn't me. And made a little money, but I had to move on. So the third job I took was just before I was ready to graduate here at Utah State. And I signed up with a company called MedIndex, and this was monitoring software for orthopedic surgeons to reimburse for their insurance. And we were really successful at it. We sold the orthopedic surgeons up here in northern Utah. We went into Idaho and sold this software that allowed them to know what their reimbursements should be with Medicare and Medicaid. And there was a value there, and they needed it, and we had a good price point, and they bought it. And it was a very good way to pay off this $20,000 loan that I owed the bankers. and also put a little money in my pocket. And I was right about graduation, so I got this idea, well, maybe I can talk this company into allowing me to go up to Colorado and open up the territory there with the same product. So I hired 2 of my fraternity brothers, flew over there, set up shop, did very little market research, and found that they didn't have the same problem that we did in Utah and in Idaho. Spent 6 months there. I think I sold one system, and we were ready to close down shop, and I learned a lesson there that you always need to do your market research and what you're involved in. And while I was there, I stumbled across some software at the time. It was called AutoCAD, and it ran on an IBM XT. And the first AT came out. That was the powerful 286 machine, and it was the first one in the nation. It came to Denver, and I bought it. I configured the software and put it together and put a plotter together. My father was an architect, as you recall, and I convinced him to lease this system. And these systems back then were very expensive if they were not running on a PC. They were running on minis, and they'd cost about $100,000 a seat, and only large corporations could afford them. But I talked my dad into buying it. He did, and it actually, he was one of the leaders in Salt Lake Valley to automate onto the computer from the draft board. And next thing I know, all of his friends were coming over, networking, all of his friends coming over saying, well, what have you got there, Lowell? I want to take a look at that. And I started selling his friends. I started selling his engineers, the other architects in the valley. Well, within the first year, we sold $1 million worth of systems, and I netted $400,000. And I was only out of school for 12 months. And I thought, boy, this is pretty good. So I took that business, and one of the fraternity brothers stayed with me. The other one went a different direction. We hired more people. And in the very beginning, I remember our desk was actually a door that we had put on just some wood, and then we put this CAD system on top of it and demoed it. And I don't know how, from a presentation standpoint or a marketing standpoint, anybody would have bought a CAD system based on that, but the technology was so interesting that everybody wanted to embrace it. And I built that. I stayed with that company for 20 years. We built it up. We developed our own CAD software. We had a package called LaserCAD. It was in some of the community colleges, and it was technology that came out of the University of Utah. And we also developed a lot of third-party applications for Autodesk. But what I found is over time, every time we developed some technology, our vendor would come in and incorporate it in their new release. And it took a lot of money to market these products that we had developed, and we were not able to get them out in the market and get the mass marketing we needed to do before the vendor would come out and copy our ideas. And yet they'd pay you just enough money on royalties and commissions and the software that we developed that it was a pretty good business, and it was really difficult to break away from that. But yet I hit this glass ceiling where you couldn't really have unlimited opportunity because you're always controlled by what the big brother had determined what the pricing should be. And so through 20 years of that, I ended up deciding to sell that to a public company about 5 years ago. During the same 20 years, I had a passion for real estate. And as you recall, those were some of my goals. I wanted to be in development. So I'd go out there and I'd take the money that I earned from my business and I'd invest it into property. And I'd do the entitlements. I'd go into the city and with the politicians and work through all the ordinances and get those entitlements and create value in that land, and then I'd sell it off to a builder or a developer. And over time that would add up. And I never touched that revenue stream. I just flip it into another property. I did what they call a 1031 exchange, where you defer the tax consequence from it. So you take the full amount that you earn and you're able to move it over into another property. And over time, over 20 years, that became quite a substantial holding. And so I sold the company, but one thing I learned that I thought would be helpful for you to know in that company, in AI Systems, is that I interviewed hundreds of people, and hired hundreds of people over the 20-year time. And whenever I hired based on qualities and characteristics. So it was nice that someone had straight A's, or they had a good education, or they had technical experience. But what I found is if I hire somebody that's got traits and characteristics, successful traits and characteristics, persistence and determination, that those guys were always my best performers. There's one individual, his name's Matt Olding. His father was a doctor. He went to Salt Lake Community College. He took 2 years on learning how to run a CAD system. So he wasn't real educated, real technical. But I looked on his resume and he had a passion for running. And he'd run this 100-mile Wasatch. It's where you'd start and you'd run up through the canyons. I think you start over by Park City and you end up over into American Fork. And his goal was to run that within 24 hours. And that was a pretty amazing goal. And just to complete it is pretty amazing. And this guy had arms that were skinny, and his legs were enormous from all the training that he would take place. He'd run a marathon just to warm up for this 100-mile Wasatch. I mean, this guy was unbelievable. So he was driven. He was honest. He had great traits. He was good with people. He was a team player. But he had no experience, and he had limited education. I brought him in. He ended up being one of my best employees. 5 years later, he was offered a 6-digit income with our vendor, running the worldwide sales force, global sales force in mechanical engineering. And we had about 5 others that fit that category. And so when you're out there looking for work, oftentimes it might be these extracurricular activities that you've had, the involvements you've had with, whether it be in sports or in music, or it be in social clubs or other organizations, that I would strongly suggest in your resumes you write those down. They may not value them as I do, but I've found that makes a big difference in the type of employee you're going to end up with. With your career in networking, you know, all the way from receiving a loan from the banker, that was because I had known him, he had known me. Working with the Christmas trees with my buddy that was my missionary companion, I established a friendship there. Working with my father and his friends, that was networking there. And then Millrock, we'll go over that here in just a few minutes. My partner there was a next door neighbor, and we became friends, and we ended up going into a business venture. And so your friends, your family, your acquaintances are going to become very important if you end up getting into an entrepreneurial environment. They'll also be very important in a structured workforce if you're working for a larger corporation. And that I think there was a little poster out front here I saw about networking, in essence, that and it's probably one of the keys to being successful in business today. Calculated risk. This is my wife, Shannon, and I always wanted to go skydiving, and when I was up here at Utah State, and I never did. So on my 40th birthday, she said, "Steve, I've got this surprise for you. We're going to go skydiving." So we went out there and we took a 4-hour class, and normally you go tandem, so you have someone on your back to make sure you land properly. And but we decided we were, going to take this calculated risk and have instructors on each side of us. And so Shannon jumped out of the plane, and she did great. She went all the way down to 2,000 feet and landed in 2,000 feet from 9,000 feet. The experts pulled her chute at 2,000 feet and did a beautiful job. Then I get up there and I'm ready to go out of the plane, and I'm a little nervous, and and you have to lean on the wing and then jump off. And the instructor's supposed to hold the side, on the side of your chute. There's an instructor on each side. And I somehow just quickly jumped off and pulled the instructor out of the plane, and he's cussing. And we're at 9,000 feet up, and we're going down. Fortunately, I had good form. And but you're supposed to count to 10. And it was the fastest 10 count I'd ever done in my life. Pulled the chute, and I was 7,000 feet up, and it took me hours to get down. And finally, when I landed, I fell to the ground because the circulation in my legs had gone out. And everybody ran over wondering if I was okay. But in business, everything you do is a calculated risk. And as an entrepreneur, you need to be willing to take those calculated risks. And so I want to go into this, into Millrock, and just spend a few minutes on that. But I want to tell you about a story that talks about risk. It talks about determination and success. A story that I personally got to see. And it's unfortunately, it's a school that has blue colors. It's just the wrong school. But it happened to this school, and I was a participant down in the Holiday Bowl, the 1980 Holiday Bowl. And it's considered one of the greatest sporting events of all time. And 890 yards they moved, BYU and SMU, 1 by air and 2 by land. With 2 minutes and 40 seconds left on the clock, the Cougars were down by 20 points, and they needed to block the punt and a miracle play to win. With 18 seconds left on the clock, McMahon hurls the ball into the end zone intended for his tight end Clay Brown, and it was knocked down. And there were 3 seconds left on the clock. McMahon huddles back up, backs up, throws the ball again in the end zone to Clay Brown when suddenly thick darkness covers around 4 SMU defenders. And somehow the heavens victoriously open up, and Brown comes down with a victorious touchdown catch. Final score, 46-45. Well, Jim McMahon was Catholic, and Brown was Catholic. And they were playing SMU, which is a Catholic school, for BYU. So they called it the Hail Mary's Pass. And they really, truly state that that game was one of the greatest games of sporting events of all time because it was such a miracle play. I mean, when I was there, most everybody had left the stadium at halftime because it was such a boring game. And yet they were so determined, and they weren't willing to give up, and they established their goals that they had won that game, and they called it the Miracle Bowl. So is true with life and all we do. We just need to keep that in mind, and it's a fine line between success and failure. But if you're determined and persistent, things will work in your favor. And speaking of determination and persistence, Millrock Park was a 22-acre site, and it was a gravel pit. And there was a lady that owned 3 acres at the top of this gravel pit. And her family had homesteaded it for over 100 years. And the only way you could get up to that spot up there is if you went down this dusty road through somebody else's property. So she had a prescriptive easement because she had no legal access other than the prescriptive easement. All that means is that she had the right to go through someone else's property, but she could never perfect it. And she couldn't improve the dusty road. So I went up there, and it took me about 2 years, and I grew to establish a friendship with her. And one day, there were a lot of people that went up there to offer to buy this land because it was it had vistas of the entire valley, and then it had the background of the Wasatch Mountains at the mouth of Big Cottonwood. And I convinced her, she called me one day and said, "Steve, I'm going to sell this property. I've had a lot of people wanting to buy it, but I'm going to sell it to you." And I was really taken back a little bit. And I said, "Great, I'll be right over there." And then I had to figure out, now how am I going to put together the money? See, on a goal, you don't necessarily know how you're going to achieve that goal. You just know you have that goal and you're going to get there. And so I said, well, I can mortgage my house, I can go out and take the money out of the company, and I can go to some friends. And I had a very difficult time convincing any friends to invest in this property because it was landlocked. So my wife supported me in it, and we mortgaged our house and everything, and we bought this land. And then we waited for about 2 years, and 2 years later we ended up, this gravel pit to the side, this 165-foot drop we bought that property and we paid millions of dollars for it. And you look at it and you think, why would you pay millions of dollars for a hole that had been, you know, mined by a gravel pit? But yet we had a vision there. We knew where we were going and we knew what we wanted to create with it. So we bought that, and then there was another 6.5 acres on the point out here that we ended up going to those owners, and because we owned 2/3 of the property, we won the monopoly game. We went to them, they said, well, we've had this property for 30 years and we want to develop it, but we'll sell it to you. But we'll sell it to you for a certain price, a substantial amount of money, and you have to close within 30 days. So my partner and I had already put in millions and millions of dollars into the property. So we went to our friends, again networking, we went to our friends, and we said we got to raise $6.5 million in 30 days. And we went down and just started talking one after another. In 30 days we had $6.5 million in the bank, and we went and closed on that property and bought it. Now we're the owner of 22 acres of what some would say questionable property, what we envisioned a beautiful site. And we then, after acquiring that, had to go to the city and get our entitlements. And we thought the land was difficult to buy. When we got in the city, we had all this political unrest there. We had a mayor that had won elections saying that he was opposed to Millrock and what we were doing here. He was elected by the city to oppose our project. In the meantime, we'd already been in through our entitlements for about a year, and it usually only takes about 6 months to get approvals. And we were entitled to put what we wanted to on there. And so we were to the point where we got to the city council, and there were 3 members of the city council that were opposed to the mayor, and 2 that were in favor of anything the mayor said or did. And some would say that our project got approved because these 3 city council members were opposed to the mayor. We tend to believe we were approved because it was a good project and that it made sense and was good for the community. So the mayor, needless to say, was furious. He was absolutely furious. So he sued the city, or he sued himself, saying that the city council didn't have the right to approve the Millrock project, and for various reasons, height, setback, density, traffic. And he took it to the 3rd District Court. And we intervened. He didn't sue us, he sued the city. We intervened and we said, well, hey, you know, we have an interest here, we need to protect that. And so the mayor's high-powered lawyer went in there and made his case, and then our lawyer made his case, and the judge looked at it and said, Mayor, every one of these points that you pointed out are frivolous and without merit and are dismissed. Why are you even here? And dismissed it. But took us 6 months of process to go through. So the citizens were unhappy that the mayor's spending tax dollars to sue this project that brings substantial income to the city. And so they decided, well, this mayor isn't good for our city. So we're going to change the form of government, change the city mayor from a strong mayor to a weak mayor, and have him become re-elected in 2 years instead of 4 years. So he went out and he got ousted, a new mayor came in. Well, the new mayor ended up being my fishing buddy. We go to Alaska every year. We're going this year. I took my son a couple of years ago. He's a businessman, he understands business, he's a great guy. He said, Steve, what can we do to help you out? He started Franklin Covey with Hiram Smith. Just excellent guy. So I said, well, Dennis, we could we could receive some help on these unusual and extraordinary costs of the road and the retaining walls that we had to put up. He said, Steve, well, I think we can do something there. So he went out and created an EDA, Economic Development Zone. And what that does is it takes the taxes that we generate off our property when it's built, redirects it to the city, and then the city gives some of it back to us to pay for some of our costs. So here we were, middle of a lawsuit with one mayor, and with another mayor, he couldn't do enough to make us happy. I mean, he just constantly was trying to help us out. And again, that gets back to the networking. It gets back to who you know and how it works, and it's just amazing. But it also gets back to persistence. there were a lot of people that thought that we were crazy to go out there and start building roads before we had that lawsuit resolved. We were actually building this road. We had millions invested in the property. We had hundreds of thousands of dollars invested in building up the road and the property. So what had happened is we went in and we built these roads, and we had the city help us out, and we acquired these 22 acres. We had 4 building sites. We had a west building here, a north one here, an east one here, and this is our south building. And this is the construction of the first building with some of the exterior skin on it. And this was spring of '05 that happened. And the architecture you can see is European, it's timeless, and everything from the exterior to the interior. This was the fun part for me. It wasn't the politics, it wasn't trying to get the investors, it was actually being able to oversee this. And you know, we spent $100 million on it in 5 years, and we built it out faster than any business park has ever been built out in the state of Utah. And it's completely full. And it's one of the most successful parks in the state. We have the highest lease rates with the lowest vacancies. And this is our west building. This was our second building. So we built one building every year. We built this parking structure right here down below it. And then this is our north building out on the point. We have a water feature. We have a big waterfall that goes down through it, 65-foot waterfall. We wanted to create atmosphere and a setting that, you know, the top businessmen in the valley would want to come and work at. And we have 5 world headquarters at our park. We have 4 regional companies that have regional offices. Just highlight one real quick, Interbank FX. Todd came to us 3 years ago. He had 5 employees. Last year he was on Forbes magazine as the 43rd fastest growing company in the country. He received Entrepreneurial of the Year last year. He received CEO this year. If you look in Utah Magazine, this month's issue will be in it. And Todd does foreign currency exchange. He does $60 billion a month in foreign currency exchange. 3 years ago, it wasn't even in business. He has over 100 employees, and his profits are about $60 million a year. It's just exciting to see those type of companies. We have another one called Galileo, very similar type success story. Clay, a friend of ours, we invested in his company actually. He commercialized voice over IP, and he has over 100 employees at our office. In fact, I think I have a picture of his interiors. This is their entry and then their front area. What he does for his employees is he has this gourmet kitchen he put into his space, and he hires a chef, and that chef comes over and cooks breakfast for the employees to help recruit. And he's looking for the brightest and the best of minds, as Galileo and Interbank FX is. And we have others like that are at Millrock. And in terms of our, you know, the last 5 years have been a lot of fun for me because I'm doing exactly what I wanted to do. Back when I was 17 with that busted leg and trying to dream of what did I want to do with my life. And it was in my mind, and it was put there. And what's amazing with goals, they're in your subconscious. You don't really realize them, but you put them in your mind, they happen. They just happen. You don't know exactly how they're going to happen and how long it's going to take, but it will happen. I promise you that if you sit down and chase your dreams and write them down and are determined to reach them, you'll reach them. If you have that persistence. Where do we go from here with Millrock? Well, we've just started. Our goal in the next 5 years are to acquire $1 billion of assets under management and ownership. That means 5 million square feet of Class A office space. We're not going to build that space now, we're going to acquire it. And the reason for that is there's going to be $1 trillion of assets that are going to be liquidated by the FDIC in the next 3 years through the challenges throughout our country because of the real estate challenges there. So some would say we live in a challenging time. My argument to you today would be that we live in the best of times. We have more opportunity now than we've ever had. You guys have the best of opportunities. You just need to go out there and look for them and figure out where you can add your value and where your passions are, and be the best you can be. And chase your dreams. Well, with that, if there are questions, I'd be happy to answer your questions. Yes?
How did you get the funding for that project? You said it cost $100 million to build. Because at first it seemed like you were struggling to get the $6.5 million. All of a sudden you get $100 million.
Okay, we had, in the partnership, Nathan and I had about 11 million between two of us, and then well, let's see, we had a total of about $15.5 million of capital. And we leveraged that capital. We had, in the last 5 years, we had this environment where you could leverage 85% of what your equity was. So we had the land free and clear, so we gave that as collateral to the banks, and we found a bank that was a strong bank. We went with Bank of America, and the three guys that ran it out of Vegas were three former BYU guys, so they were Utah guys. That helped us, and we convinced them of what we had was really pretty unique and special, and they believed in us, and they loaned us $90 million. And then as you build one building, then you take it out to the long-term financing. And when we're building it, it's in recourse. It means that we personally guarantee it. So Shannon, my wife, Nathan, his wife, personally guarantee it. Then once we build it out and stabilize it, lease it up, then the bank, then we can go out and finance it long-term. It becomes non-recourse. And the only recourse that a bank would have is to come and acquire that property if it were to default.
How long does that loan carry out over, you say?
The construction loans were typically a year and a half, but the long-term financing goes for 10 years. So each building has its own financing. We currently have our last building that we've brought online. It's not financed long-term yet. And this market's a lot more challenging, but so we're getting a little more creative. We're working with a credit union and a local bank. Where normally you work with insurance companies. There's a market called the CMBS market. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that, but that's a commercial-backed security market. And that really financed most of the real estate in the U.S. in the last 5 years. Before that, it was usually life companies. And so your life premiums would go to finance it. And so the CMBS market, they would securitize these loans and they'd sell them off to investors, just as they've done with the housing, and that's what's caused a lot of problems in the housing. And that market's completely dried up. And that's the reason why there's a big crisis in our country for residential and commercial real estate today. Yes?
2 questions, actually. So are you done building then? Is that it for the Millrock?
We've built out that site. There's no more acreage there. We think the opportunity right now in the next 3 or 4 years is acquiring assets. So we're looking in the West. We're looking in Arizona. We're looking in California, Nevada, Idaho.
Take the Millrock name and apply it?
Yeah, we're going to take that branding and with what it stands for. We've created a brand in Salt Lake that represents the best of class. And we're going to acquire other Class A office space that meets our criteria, but we'll have an opportunity to acquire it at a fraction of what it costs to build. And then our upside will be much better.
How was it getting your first vendors to move in and lease?
The first one, we went through an agent, and it took a little time. But once we landed, it was an insurance company. We gave them a few extra incentives.
So did you have your own criteria for we want the best of the best? To get
Well, it kind of attracted it because of the location, the architecture, the lease rate. It's a real, there's no one out there in the suburban market that has higher lease rates. We charge $28 a foot. So these buildings they gross about $12 million a year between the 4 buildings. And the net operating income's about $7 million. And so in our industry, you take that net operating income and you apply a cap rate to it, tells you the value of your building. And based on a 7 cap, our buildings would be worth a little over $130 million. So we'd have, we've created about $40 million of equity in it in the last 5 years. Yes.
Do you only do leases then, or do you anything else besides leases?
You know, I'm a software guy. I spent 20 years in the software industry, but I really have a passion for what I'm doing right now, and I feel like I'm a kid in a candy store, and this is what I've done. I've done the entitlements over the last 20 years. So on the political side, I've gone in and created value there, but this is the first time I've had the opportunity to take from the beginning, create it, work with the architects, tell them what I wanted. All the colors, the interiors, everything, I picked out the patterns. That's really a lot of fun to me. And other than our personal residence, this is the only development I've done. So, yes?
Why did you decide to go into commercial real estate versus retail or industrial?
That's a good question. It probably was more driven by what was allowed on this particular property we had, that it was zoned ORD, which is Office Research and Development, and I think that drove it. In hindsight, I'm glad that it was in there, not in retail right now is really struggling, and some of the industrial in Utah is doing pretty well, but retail's and office, if you're in areas that isn't infill like ours is, there's higher vacancies, and those guys are struggling right now also. But so it was more of, wasn't probably determined, and more because of the property.
Do you think you'll pursue those other real estate opportunities in real estate, in like retail or?
I think we're focused. We pride ourselves being in the surgeons of what we do, and we've got it down to a cookie cutter approach. We know what we do, and we do it good, and so what our objective is just to own Class A office space. And there's a couple companies nationally, if you were to Google them, that do that. They're big players, and we're just starting out. We're just getting our foot in the door on it. Yes?
So this is your first development, and you obviously said you were a software guy. So I mean, what kind of due diligence? You obviously talked about that it's important to always do your market research, especially after the tree thing. So I mean, what kind of due diligence, what kind of market research did you have to do to be able to, to even go into this? I mean, I don't know. It sounds like you knew that the site was going to be a good site, and you obviously have turned out an awesome product for these businesses. So it's like, this being your very first time in there, I would think you would have had to have done some pretty extensive research.
Well, in real estate, location. We had the best location.
Yeah.
But what we didn't have was the expertise. So I surrounded myself with experts in the industry. I hired a guy by the name of Joel Madsen who had built office space for 35 years. He built the Triad Center with Khashoggi, built out Union Park with Tom Lloyd, and he was a specialist. And I made him one of my right-hand guys. So he gave us good advice, and he knew the industry in and out. So, and then I hired on a lady by the name of Joyce Pappas, and she had worked for Tom Lloyd in leasing and property management. And so we started even from scratch on the property management, because we're a little unusual. We didn't just go out and build it and then flip it. We were investors, operators, long-term holders. So we want to keep this in our families, and we're private. So the key to our success there was surrounding ourselves with people that had been to the rodeo before, knew what to do, and were really good at what they did. And then keep them motivated and keep them focused. And the good thing about our team is we've had the same team members from the beginning in the last 5 years. Everybody's there and it's intact. But we had to set up our property management. We had to go through that, how you set the budgets and CAM charges and overcharges and maintenance. We hired a guy from New York that had 25 years of property experience, went to BYU, got his master's degree, came over, we hired him just by chance, and he's my operational manager that operates the day-to-day operations of the park. Yeah.
One more question. Dave always talks about when you first open your business, being able to have enough there for you to live off of. Was this your primary project, your only job that you were doing? Or did you already have other income set aside to live off of while this was going on?
On the Millrock?
Yeah.
Well, I had received my income from selling my business, and then I had the land that I had 1031 or exchanged into this particular property over the years. That was kind of like a retirement account for me. And then actually the development side pays pretty well. They give you 5% of whatever the construction costs are on development fees. So, you can run the math, but on a $100 million project, it's pretty good.
Thanks, Steve.